So while Photoshop is launching, we should already have the files that we need to work with today downloaded from Blackboard. So you have the book files available to you, either in your download folder or your desktop, and you have the pictures for Bridge available to you. It's taking a little bit to get caught up here, but eventually, there we go. You're going to see the Adobe CC splash screen. Anything you've worked on recently will show up in this view. So I have a bunch of pictures popping up here, but you probably don't, which is perfectly fine. We're going to work through chapter 1 in the book, which is pretty simple. We're just going to get to understand the work area, and we're going to actually do a little bit of work while we're doing it to practice. So we're going to learn how to make certain things work in Photoshop and where all of our different tool families live. So the work area in Photoshop, let's do a File, Open. So you can either go to the top menu and choose File, Open, or you can click on this Open button over here on the left, or if you are in the File drop-down menu, you see that there's a shortcut associated with Open. And I'm going to always tell you shortcuts that I think you should know that are going to speed your workflow, and Open is one of them. Command O, letter O. So whether you click on a button or Command O, we're going to go into Open. And I'm going to have you navigate to your lesson folder that you just downloaded. So I put mine on my desktop, and I named it Photoshop Book Files. So I'm clicking Desktop, Photoshop Book Files. And then in lesson 1, I want us to open the O1 start.psd file. PSD is the extension. It stands for Photoshop Document. That is the default extension that Photoshop gives to any file made inside of it. Just like a Word would be a .docx, Illustrator is a .ai, Photoshop is going to be a .psd. So go ahead and say Open. And we should have our work area in front of us looking like this. So on a Mac, these are free-floating windows. So sometimes it's confusing. You might feel like you're in Photoshop, like right now. My screen looks like I'm in Photoshop, but when I go up to the top left to my actual application bar, it says Finder. That's because I just clicked on my desktop. So it's giving me application options that are specific to that. I have to click into the Photoshop file to activate the Photoshop menu items. Or some people just prefer to make their screen a lot bigger and fill the whole window, whatever works. Everybody have this. Do we have Photoshop open and have this file showing? Oh. I logged you into my own account. Oh, I thought it was going to work. I love these. All right, everybody good? Okay, so Photoshop, like the video said, we work primarily with pixels of color. Their raster images are just a bunch of square pixels, but we put so many of them in 1 square inch that our eye sees it as continuous tone color. If you ever see a pixelated image, something that somebody took from the web and then blew it up too big and you can actually see the pixels and the squares, that's just because it's a low resolution image. Maybe it only came with 72 pixels per inch, which is what we see things on the web. And now all of a sudden you're trying to make it big. So it only has that many squares of color per inch. So it just makes the squares bigger. And then you start actually seeing the squares, which are the pixels. And it looks quite ugly. All right. So let's get to know our work area. So we have it on our screen right now, and we all should have the same file open. What we have at the top in the application bar is the Photoshop menu items that we're going to be using. So File, Edit, Image, Layer, all the way across to the Help option. We also have our menu bar, which is at the top left, which is opposite of a PC. If you work on a PC, this is where we have Minimize, Maximize, and Close, red, yellow, and green. We then have our next bar is the Options bar. And this Options bar is going to be specific to whatever tool you have selected. So the toolbar along the left, I want everybody to first click on that very top tool, which is the Move tool. It looks like a plus sign with arrows all around it. Once you do that, everything in this option bar, this gray bar along the top of our screen, is specific to that particular tool. So, for example, we see this Move tool with a drop-down box next to it, and it says no tool presets have been defined. If we had made some specific presets and named them, they would show up here. Then we have Auto Select, either on or off. That's a little check mark there. And then it's going to say, what do you want us to select? In the drop-down box, do you want it to select the layer or the group? If you have this checkbox turned on and it says to layer, when you hover over a picture, this one is simple. So if we look at our bottom right panel, we see the layers panel. And right now we see that this document has 2 layers. Photoshop is based on stacking order also, like Illustrator. The bottom layer is the photo of the flower itself. It's that whole photograph, so this whole thing. We also have another layer that's not turned on yet, but it's going to be a banner. And when we do turn it on, the banner is going to show up at the top here, but you're still going to be able to see through to the picture below it. When this option is turned on that I just mentioned, let's say we have 20 different layers here. We have lots of banners, lots of text, lots of other pictures on here. Sometimes it's hard to remember where in your layers you need to go. So if this option is turned on, if I'm hovering over this flower and I click on it with the Move tool, it's going to auto-select the layer that that flower is on. So if I have 20 layers of different flowers, it's going to at least highlight the correct layer, which is super helpful. If you don't like that feature, it hasn't existed in Photoshop for a long time. So if you've used Photoshop in the past and that bothers you, just uncheck that up in your option bar. Okay. All right. Then we also see some transform controls. And if you were in Illustrator, these actually look pretty familiar to what we did last week. We see a line horizontal, a line based on the left or the right, the top, the bottom, the center, all of those different things. They're also grayed out right now, which means we can't use them. All right. We're going to start looking around here by using our zoom tool. So in your toolbar, if you have one long skinny toolbar, it's going to be the last tool at the bottom that looks like a magnifying glass. And once you choose that and bring your cursor into the picture, you're going to see a magnifying glass with a plus inside it. That means that every time you click, you're going to zoom in and it's going to center based on where you're clicking. So if we take our cursor and put it over the center of the flower and we start clicking, it's going to keep zooming in, always keeping that point at the center. Well, it's pretty powered. So, okay. Here's something that I want to share with everybody because it sometimes happens. If your software is not behaving and you're doing everything right and you know you're doing everything right, sometimes it's literally a glitch that the only way to make it work is to close Photoshop and reopen it. So I'm going to recommend you try that. Okay. Because the mouse is fully powered. Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy. Do a Command Option Escape, all three buttons, and just hit. Command Option Delete is the three-finger salute on a PC. If any of you are on a Mac. If you work on a Mac, it's Control-Alt-Delete, right? That's what forces things to change on a PC. On a Mac, it's Command Option Escape. You might want to write that down because every now and then you want to, if like she could not get Photoshop to shut down, it wasn't doing anything, so we had to use the good old three-finger salute. Sort of appears to be working better. We'll see. Okay, so using the zoom tool, we have clicked and zoomed in, zoomed in, zoomed in. If we want to zoom out using the same tool, we just have to use a keyboard modifier, and it's the Option button on a Mac, Alt on a PC. And notice that when we hold that down, we now get a minus sign inside of our cursor, and that will zoom out. So the default status of this tool is to zoom in, and you hold the Option or Alt key to get it to zoom out. A keyboard shortcut, just like in other Adobe programs, is to hold Command and hit the plus sign up in your numbers row, and that's going to zoom in, and Command minus. That's really convenient because sometimes you're working with a tool and you don't want to have to switch to the zoom tool. You don't. You stay in whatever tool you're in and you just Command plus 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 or Command minus to get it to back out. All right. Also, if we're using the zoom tool, let's look at our option bar at the top here. We do see that the default action, the one that's kind of lit up, is that your zoom tool functions as a zoom in with a plus sign. Notice to the right of it, there's the minus. So if you wanted to, without having to hold that Alt key or Option key, you could choose the zoom out version up here in your Option tool and get it to permanently stay, at least while it's checked, as a zoom out. I'm going to push mine right back to zoom in because that's the default behavior and that's where you want to be. And then I also want you to look at the scrubby zoom. If you have scrubby zoom checked up here at the top, all you need to do is hold down your cursor and pull left or right, and you're going to zoom in or zoom out. So pull all the way to the right for quite a ways. And can anybody tell me, based on something they're seeing on their screen, what magnification level we max out at?
12,800.
Yep. And that is in two places. Down here at the very bottom left and up in your tab of your document, it tells you what view you're at. So this is pixel by pixel. When you're doing editing, sometimes it's helpful to be really zoomed in and to see these edges this way. Something you don't want to do is edit at a view like this, which is 81%. You might think it looks good, like you might think you got rid of this weed right here and covered it up with the background color. But when you zoom in a little bit more, you see that you left a lot of fringe pixels, and it's going to print how you see it at 100%. So you always want to edit at 100% or higher to get the best results. So the other options up in our option bar are 100% or fit in screen or full screen. So using those buttons, you can achieve different views. But to get those options to show up, you have to be in the zoom tool. And quite often you're in a bunch of other tools. So then the command plus and the command minus are far easier to use. All right. Let's, another thing you can do inside the document is just right click on it and then you get all of these options as well. Fit on screen, 100, 200, or the actual physical print size. So I'm going to do fit on screen so I can just see it a little bit bigger and better. If your right click on your mouse is not working, you can change that behavior in the settings panel, or you just have to hold Control, which actually does exist on a Mac keyboard. It's the far left. Hold Control when you click, and that'll force a right click. So while we're getting to learn about our workspace here, that's all we're really doing today. So far we've looked at how when we pick a tool, our option bar changes. Now we're going to start looking over at some of these other options over here on the right. And we're going to brighten up this image because I think if you look at it, you all agree it's weird, right? It's dingy. It's not a good picture. So there are tons and tons and tons of ways of fixing this color that we're going to learn throughout the course of the semester, but we're going to start with probably the easiest, most basic, and frankly not the best version, but that's where we're going to start. So first thing we have to do is go to our layers panel, which is down here, and we have to make sure that the layers panel is activated. And we have two layer options. We have our background layer and we have the layer on top of it. Whenever you're trying to do something to a layer, you have to first select it in the layer panel. So click on the layer called rows to make sure that it's highlighted and active. Now whatever you tell it to do is going to happen because it has something activated. Had we not had anything chosen here, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have known how to brighten the image because there was no image selected. All right, now, how many of you above this layers grouping have a grouping called properties and adjustments? Do you guys see this? Does anybody not? Let's put it that way. Because my view when I worked through this wasn't there. If you don't see the panel I'm talking about showing on your screen, you can always go to the top of your window and choose the window drop down. Here's where they all live. So adjustments is the window that we're going to be working with. If it wasn't showing up over here at the right, that's how you can activate it and get it to show up. So these adjustments all have little icons, and as you hover over them, they're going to tell you what they are. The first one is brightness, contrast, then levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, and so on and so forth. Notice also when you hover over that, you're going to be making an adjustment layer. So we are going to click on that very first icon, the one that says brightness and contrast. And two things happen. In our layers panel, we now have a layer right above our rows. It's turned on, the eyeball is turned on. We see that brightness contrast icon, and then we see a new layer kind of shifted to the right and a little link in between it. What that means is that this adjustment is affecting every layer beneath it. Right now there's only one, but if we had 20 layers underneath it, that would be affecting all 20 layers. We'll learn later how to make it affect just the one below it, which is usually what your goal is. But for now, there is only one below it, so it's all good. So that showed up there. Also, it popped up here saying brightness and contrast. So take the brightness slider and go to the left and go to the right. You're starting to see changes, correct? So is there a point where maybe it's too bright when I went to 100? How can you tell that like, what do you visually see that's kind of screwed it up? It looks bright and pretty and maybe kind of artsy, but it kind of blew out all the detail on the bright areas, right? It went too far. So in this case, what you're doing is just a visual adjustment. What do you think looks like an improvement? Contrast, you can play with that as well. You can give the background more contrast or less contrast. So this is a visual correction. And does anybody think that that could be dangerous? Why? Any guesses?
I'm just thinking about like printing. It can come out blown out, and then detail can be lost. Or
Yep. And I'm betting there's 20-ish of you in here. I'm betting the number that I pulled over to and the contrast that I pulled to, nobody else matched it exactly. It's a personal thing,
Yeah.
right? So what looks good to me might not look good to you. Another issue you can have is how good, new, and bright is your monitor. If you're working on a monitor that's kind of dark and dingy, you're going to overcorrect, right? So in the real world of graphic design, you don't just wing it. If you actually are working if your job is to do photo retouching, they're calibrating their systems probably daily, if not more often, if that's really what you're doing. So say you're a Photoshop retoucher for like Glamour magazine or something. Number one, you're working in a room that's all of the walls are painted neutral gray. There are no windows. You don't wear bright, shiny clothes that can reflect in your monitor and skew, believe it or not. And they calibrate the monitors to their output printers at least daily, if not twice a day. It's a much more serious world.
can printers be all different too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So in this room, when please we get a better printer. I keep begging, and I thought for sure we were getting it now. What we're going to do then is we're going to have a color calibration spec that's set up that printer knows how to read what these monitors tell it. So we're going to match very well. Right now we don't match real well. A lot of the things we print over there will look just fine, and some of them will be so horrible. You will hand them to me and say, but I swear my file looks better. And I'll say, I believe you. I know it does. So yes, all printers are different. You send to a magazine that prints on glossy paper. Do you think that when ink lands on glossy paper, it behaves differently than when it lands on newsprint?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So even that, dot gain is what that's called. You drop a piece of ink on a newspaper, it's going to spread out, right? So if you're trying to cover this much room in black, for example, you need a couple of splashes of ink and it goes, right? If it's high gloss stock paper that's really kind of hard to penetrate, you're going to need a lot more dots of ink to get that same coverage. So those are things we'll talk about and you'll learn about over the course of many classes here. So color correcting based only on your own opinion can be dangerous until you're really trained in it, because what looks good to you might not look good to anybody else, and it might also your monitor, if you're working on it, especially on a laptop. How many of you work on a laptop and it depends which way you push your screen, what it looks like, right? The way you tilt your screen totally affects how you can see it. Yeah.
I work on a laptop, but I run it onto smart TV just so I can actually see it without the glasses.
It's a great idea. That's what I need. So yeah, you have to, what looks good, and then all of a sudden you tilt your laptop window back and all of a sudden it's really bright or really dark. That's scary. So I do recommend that if you have access to a traditional monitor, that when you're color correcting and doing Photoshop type work, that you don't work on laptops, because just that little bit of a bend can skew it. All right. So all we did on this example was we saw how this layer panel works and how an adjustment works. We pulled this brightness and contrast around to what we wanted it to be. Notice that there's an auto button. Why don't you guys all click the auto button? And that's what Photoshop's brain decides is right. Do you agree or disagree? Who knows? Auto adjustments, do you think they're foolproof? Absolutely not. On an image that has a good range of color, like it has pure whites, whitish, grays, dark grays, kind of black, and pure black, it does a good job because it has the whole range to work with. On really dark or really bright images, autocorrect usually doesn't do as well. That's a lot different from how I had it, and I'm not a fan, but that's how it starts. So you can use the auto button, or at least as a start point, and then maybe you choose to tweak it from there. So that is your adjustment layer. Now, a little jumping ahead, but I just want to show you the cool thing about these adjustment layers. So here it is. It's affecting whatever is below it. See how there's a little eyeball to the left of it? That means that that layer is showing. So click on the eyeball to turn it off. Click on the eyeball to turn it on. So you can change your mind and just disable it, basically. If we really hated it, we could drag it down to the trash can down here at the bottom right, or we would right-click and say delete if we really hated it. But the neat thing about this, let's go back and turn it on, and then make an adjustment that's pretty bad. Like do a bad job with your correcting. And then I want you to do a File, Save As. So up at your File menu, choose File, Save As. And in that same lesson folder, I want you to just call this your name and then flower. And it's going to keep the PSD extension, Photoshop document. So here's our file. It's called brendaflower.psd. I think it's the best work I've ever done. And I send it to my boss. My boss opens it and says, "Dear God, this is horrible." The cool thing about adjustments is that this is always editable. So they can simply come in here and double click on this adjustment layer icon and say, "You moron, I'll fix it. This is how it should have been." So adjustment layers are non-destructive, and that's a huge, huge, huge thing. Whenever you work in Photoshop, you need to work in a non-destructive workflow, meaning you can change your mind a year later, anybody else can. You're not ruining the original file. Even if it was a garbage file, it's still there and it exists. So non-destructive editing is really important. And we do that by using these adjustment layers. Turn them on, turn them off, change our mind. Okay? All right. All right, the next thing we're going to learn about, and we're also therefore going to learn about our workspace. It's not so much that we're learning these tools, we're kind of exploring the workspace as we go is the bigger picture here. So we're going to learn how to sample a color. So at the bottom of your tools, over here on the left, you see two color chips, one stacked on top of the other. The top one is your foreground color. The bottom one is your background color. By default, they're usually black and white. So right above them, you see a black and a white chip. And if you're not black and white, you can click on that and it's going to reset them to be their default black and white. The keyboard shortcut to do that, I'll mention much later, is easy. It's the letter D for default. Whenever you push the letter D and you're not in your type tool, it's going to default your foreground and background colors to black and white. Sarah! Everybody say hi to Sarah. Clap for Sarah.
Hi guys!
She does this to
Sarah,
me
what do you mean
all the
clap?
time.
We don't clap.
Oh my God, did I leave that?
You did.
Thank
And
you.
then I was thinking, you're gonna text Brenda and tell her she left her phone.
Sarah teaches primarily web and software developer, the hard, brainy stuff. But you guys get her a couple of times.
Twice, Web Dev 1 and Advancements in Web Design.
Yeah. Web Dev 1 you'll have in the spring, right? You have them in the spring. So basic HTML coding, this spring you get Sarah.
Ta-da!
She's awesome.
I think you left your umbrella in the classroom. Would that be from last semester, you think? An umbrella? Yeah. Okay. Are you a pink and white polka dotted umbrella? Yeah. I think it's in the not to point you out. It's in the classroom. Okay. I haven't touched it, so.
That's how much we care. We keep things. And when you come back,
Actually, we're just too lazy to clean the classroom. Probably.
pretty much. Pretty much. Okay. All right, moving on. Sampling a color. We're going to look at that next. So by default, the background and foreground colors are black and white down here in our color chips. We're going to turn on the visibility of that layer. It's called ribbons. So over in your layers panel, click on the eyeball next to the ribbon panel, and you will see it show up. If you guys look at this little thumbnail in your layers panel, you'll see that ribbon, but you'll also see that it shows up on like a gray and white checkerboard. That just signifies that it's on a transparent background. Yep. Yep. So that's a transparent background, meaning it's basically on a piece of glass. So when you put it down on top, you can see right through to the layer below it. All that's covering up anything below it is this blue banner that we just turned on. All right, we now want to work with that ribbon layer, so we have to select it in our layers panel. So highlight the layer that's called ribbon, Make sure that that is truly selected. And we're going to grab a new tool from our toolbar. We're going to grab the eyedropper tool. And it is about the 6th tool down or so. It looks like an eyedropper. Imagine that. So click on the eyedropper tool. And we're going to bring it over into our document. Now what it's going to do is whatever pixel is underneath that eyedropper, when we click, it's going to sample the colors in it. Now at the view I'm at, there's lots of different blues making that up, aren't there? Let's zoom in and see. So look right now at all the different colors of blue. I really zoomed into that, but depending where my cursor is hovering over, I might sample a light blue, a medium blue, or an almost black. So if you don't like the sampled color that you get the first time, if there's some variation in the color, just kind of move around and keep sampling. If you want to be very specific and grab a color, you're going to have to zoom in like I just did. Command 0 takes you back out to this full page view if you were zoomed in. So with your cursor over any area in this dark blue banner, click once. And what that does is sample that color, and it loads it as your color chip in your foreground color. Also, if you hold down your cursor, it shows you inside that wheel. As I'm moving around, do you see how it shows me? The color on the bottom was my first click. That was the color blue I sampled the first time. But now it's showing me whatever my eyedropper is hovering over, it's showing me a sample of what that blue will look like. So if I meant to get a lighter blue, I can just kind of keep moving around here, or a darker blue, whatever. Doesn't really matter, just sample one of the colors of blue within that banner. And note how it did load that as your color chip down here as your foreground color. All right. Let's take our zoom tool. So go and choose that. It's at the bottom of your toolbar. And let's zoom in a few times so that we can see this lower third portion of our image. So we can see the flower and the space to the right of it. And once you have that as your view on the screen, we're going to now switch and we're going to grab the rectangular marquee. So that is the second tool down. It's a bunch of dotted lines that look like a rectangle. Just like in Illustrator, any tool that has more tools nested underneath it is going to have that little triangle in the lower right corner. And if you click and hold down your mouse, it's going to show that menu of other options. So we can see we have a rectangular marquee, an elliptical, a single row, and a single column. So that's where we find our different options. Keep the rectangular marquee as your option. And we're going to drag out a rectangle shape down here in our image. And while we're dragging, we're going to get a little gray box that has our measurements showing up. So as long as you keep your mouse held down and you drag, you're going to see those measurements. And we're going to drag to make a rectangle that is about 3/4 of an inch by 2.5 wide. So start dragging, and wide 2.5. I started mine too small. If that happens and you want to redraw again, Command D is the shortcut for deselect. So start in the pink flower, drag over. Still not making mine big enough. Guess you got to really start in there. So about 2.5 inches wide by 0.75 tall. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you do see that tooltip there, which is quite helpful. So somewhere in there. When you use the rectangular marquee tool, you're not actually making a shape, you're just making a selection. In Photoshop lingo, these little dashes that are flashing are often called marching ants. So you should see your marching ants, and what that's saying is, this is the shape that you've selected. What do you want me to do with it now? It doesn't really exist until we do something. And because I'm still on the layer called the ribbon, there's nothing there. The only stuff that exists on that layer is way up high, right? It's that ribbon. if I were on this bottom layer of rows, then it would say everything underneath here is what I assume you want to select, but I'm not even on that layer. All right, now they're going to walk us through a way of painting this in that I think is stupid, but if you're following along with the book, I guess we'll humor the book and I'll show you. So they're telling us to get the brush tool. If you push the letter B on your keyboard, it'll jump you to the brush tool. That's the shortcut to get to it, but it's about, I don't know, 6 or 8 tools down in your toolbar. So select the brush tool as your first step. Then we're going to change how it behaves. So anywhere in our image over here, we're going to right click. And because we have the brush tool selected, we get this contextual menu that pops up. And it says, okay, what kind of a brush do you want to use? And you can scroll through this list. You can see that there's a bunch that are there already. The soft round brush is the one that is defaulted to be open. And then the size of it, we change up at the top here with this slider. So how big is our brush? We're going to make it 65 pixels. Yep.
I'm not getting it where you can actually see what the brush looks like. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
So that's okay. So make it about 65 pixels and a soft brush in this contextual menu that pops up. And then to get that floating window to go away, just hit Enter on your keyboard. Now we're going to take our brush and we're going to brush inside of this selection. Notice you don't have to be precise. If you brush outside the lines, it doesn't matter because it's only staying within the confines of this selection that we had made. So that's one way of filling a selection with color. I find it to be the dumbest way possible because how long did that take to do? At least a few seconds, right? All right. Here's a cool thing in a lot of this software. It's your best friend. It's called undo. If you forget how to find it, you go up to Edit, Undo, but you see Command Z as the shortcut. Command Z, all of that nonsense away. It might take more than one click, depending if you clicked and re-clicked with your cursor when you were painting. The far better way, faster way, and being efficient is what we really want to do is fill that selection with our foreground color, which is blue, right? It's the one we sampled. So to fill with your foreground color on a Mac, you hold down the Option button and you hit Option Delete. To fill with your background color is Command Delete. So if your background color is white, that's how you can quickly fill something with white. So Option Delete fills it with whatever your foreground color is. That took 0.035 seconds versus several seconds of painting. Okay? So whenever you want to fill something with your foreground color, that's much better way. All right. Selecting and using a hidden tool. So I showed you how under the rectangular marquee has that little triangle, meaning there are more things hidden underneath it. What if we want to use one of those tools? So we want to use the polygonal lasso, but it doesn't show right now. So what we need to do is actually, we need to go to the tool that's the third one down, and it is called the lasso tool, and it kind of looks like a Western lasso. We're going to click and hold down, and we're going to see that there are other options. There's the normal lasso, the polygonal, and the magnetic. We're going to highlight that second tool and let go of our mouse, and that activates that tool. So we are now using the polygonal lasso tool. What this does is every time we click in a dot-to-dot fashion, it creates a straight line from one click to the other and makes a shape for us. All right. We're going to come to the left edge of this banner. And if you want to get your marching ants to stop, Command D for deselect, remember that. So in the top left of this rectangle right now, we're going to click once to start our polygonal lasso. And then we're going to come down about halfway. Basically, we're notching out a triangle. That's what we're going to do here. So move in a little bit and go about halfway down and click again. And then connect that to the bottom left corner of our existing rectangle and click. And then go up, and you're going to know that you're attached or that you hit your starting point when your cursor changes from just being this polygonal lasso to having a little circle to the bottom right of it. When you see that, you know you're hovering over your start point, and when you click, it's going to connect them. So make the clicks to make that triangle. And whatever is underneath that selection, we want to go away. So all we have to do is hit delete on our keyboard. And whatever is under our marching ants gets deleted. All right, Command D to deselect the marching ants again. Oops, I didn't get mine perfectly over to the edge, so I still have that skinny blue line there because I wasn't zoomed in well. So I'm just going to clean that up a smidge. Just doing that exact same process and hitting delete again. So now we have a shape that's kind of a notched out ribbon looking thing. Take your move tool and we're going to move this shape over to the right so that it's kind of right up to the edge of our photo. All right, if you do Command 0, we're going to see our whole image. What happened when I moved my banner over? The one I just made? Something else moved? Happy birthday moved too, didn't it? So, the reason that happened, and we're going to deal with it and learn more about this much later, but just so you know, the reason it happened is when I went to draw and create this new banner down here, I didn't make a new blank layer first. I just did it on the existing layer, and therefore they all move in tandem. They're all in the same layer. If I wanted them to be able to move separately, I should have put that piece on its own new layer and then been able to move that one around. No big deal, but that's what happened. All right. Also looking around our workspace area here, we're also going to learn, slow down. We're going to learn how to set tool properties up in that option bar. So I told you when you click on a tool in the toolbar, whatever is specific to that tool is going to show up in the option bar. So we're going to grab our type tool in our toolbar. So it's the letter T, it's about 3/4 of the way down. Click on that. And then when you bring your cursor over onto your actual document, you're going to see that insertion point like you see in Microsoft Word. Before we do anything though, we're going to set up how it behaves up here in our option bar. So your font choices are the first thing. I see Myriad Pro. If I click on that down arrow, I'm going to see all the different fonts that are currently installed on this system. And I can pick whichever one I want. We're going to learn when we get to the type chapter specifically how we find fonts on Typekit, how we search for them on here. But for now, we're just going to pick one, whatever you want, set your type, the font that you want. If it has options within that family, they're going to show up in the second drop-down. So had I stuck with Myriad Pro, I could have chosen regular, italic, bold, or bold italic from the next drop-down. I picked a font. The next one that I picked was Acumen Pro. And it only comes in ultra black italic. There are no other options, so that's why I don't see them there. The next option you get is the actual size of your type. You can type in a number here. You can use the drop-down arrow and pick a font size that is kind of preset, anywhere from 6 point to 72 point. 72 point font is 1 inch tall, just so you kind of know and have a visual. Or what you can do is you can hover over this TT, and your cursor turns into a double arrow and a scrubby hand. If you click and hold down your mouse, you can now scrub left or right and change the size. So if you wanted, let's say 68, you could possibly find it faster here than typing it in. Or if you just want to make it a smidge bigger, but you don't know what number is going to work, you can just use this scrubby hand here instead. Let's all choose 32, which is not a preset option, so you either have to type it in or scrub it in. And type is measured in points, so PT is what is going to be behind it, 32 point type. All right, now we need to tell it what color we want it to be. So as we keep going over to the right here in our option bar, we're going to see a color chip, and it's still filled with blue as our foreground color. Blue on blue is not going to work. So click in that color square, and you get your color picker to show up. From here, you can pull this double arrow up and down the skinny color bar to the right, and you can get into the family that you're looking for. So I want reds, I want magentas, I want blues, greens, yellows, whatever. And once you get into the general family that you want, like greens, you can see in this big square, there's everything from a very light green to a dark green, a rich green, almost black. So this is the tints and shades of it. What that color looks like with white added to it and what that color looks like with black added to it. So using the color picker, you can use this version to select a new color. So pick whatever color you want and say OK, and notice that that chip changed color. Another way you can do that, instead of going through the option bar, is you can go over to the right-hand side where you have panels, and you have the color panel, which looks like what we just used, or you have a swatch panel. And how this swatch panel looks depends on the default view mode that you're in. So if everybody clicks on the swatch panel on the right, at the top right, you're going to see the more information menu, those 3 or 4 lines. Click on that. And the way that you view them can be a small thumbnail, a large thumbnail, a list, and I happen to be in the list view. I'm going to switch to small thumbnail, and that might be how you guys were seeing it. Now I just see swatches of color. So if I want it to be this light yellow, I might click on pastel yellow. When I click on it in the swatch panel, it changed it up here in the option bar, and it changed it at the bottom of the tools. So selecting it here made it our active color now. Okay, we still have the type tool selected. Take your cursor down to this second ribbon that we made and click once. And by default, the filler text lorem ipsum is going to show up. Start typing your name and it's going to just replace it. So now you're seeing what that font looks like that you chose and in that color that you chose. If your name doesn't fit, we'll be moving it around, but I want you to get your name typed in first. If you're happy, if you spelled your name right, go ahead and click on the checkbox up in the option bar or just hit Enter Return on your keyboard. That will accept the changes. If your name isn't positioned well, take the Move tool, which is the very top tool. Notice in your layers panel, the layer that's active is the one that's your name. So that's when we use the Move tool, it's going to be moving your name, and then you can reposition it however you'd like. Go back and grab the type tool again. Let's say that the color that you chose is not what you want. With the type tool, we're going to double click on the text again, and that's going to select it for us. Say you want a different color, go find a different one in the swatch panel, click on it in the swatch panel, and then hit Enter or the checkbox up here at the top. Whoops. And now you've changed the color. It's probably not a color that you like, though, is my guess. Let's say we want to match the color yellow that already exists in Happy Birthday. Let's double click with the type tool on your name again, and then go over to the tools and grab the eyedropper and hover over the yellow in the birthday, happy birthday text and click once. That should grab that color as your foreground color, and it actually should have filled my type too, but it didn't. With my name highlighted, I clicked on the color chip up at the top option bar that happened to still be orange. And instead of that, I'm going to come over to my foreground and background colors at the bottom of the toolbar where that yellow is selected. And I'm going to click on it there, and that's going to change it out. So you can sample any color in this image. Maybe you wanted it to be pink and you wanted it to be a pink color that you sampled from the flower. By doing that, you know that the colors are going to work with your image. You don't have to guess what color pink looks good. You sample it right out of your image itself using that eyedropper tool. We'll learn much more about these tools and how to use them in future chapters. We're just kind of looking around the workspace today again. All right. The last section in here, just very simply, is about the panels and how you can move them around, collapse them, make them bigger, whatever works for your workflow. So if you look at the panels on the right-hand side, if we wanted to collapse them, let's look at our swatch panel. Do you see at the top right, there's double arrows, and if we click on that, it's going to collapse all of our icons. So we now have more workspace. If all of those panels were eating up our workspace, if we're on a small screen or a laptop and you want to collapse them, it's the double arrows. If you click on any one of those, it's going to expand it out again. Any of these panels you can also undock. So if I wanted my swatch panel to always be floating on my screen, I can take that swatch tab, click, hold down my mouse, and drag it and park it over here. Now I undocked it. It's wherever I want it. It's available for me to use. Okay? So you can customize this how you'd like. Your panels are always going to be on the right. Tools are always going to be on the left. And once you're in a specific tool, the option bar is always going to change to be specific to the tool that you're using. Okay? All right. That is the end of chapter 1, which is pretty simple, just getting around here. So you can do a file, save if you want to. You do not ever need this again, or just a file close. And then when it says, do you want to save this? You can say whatever you prefer, yes or no. We don't need this again. So I'm just going to say don't save. And we're right back out. All right. Let's stop there.